I've heard of
Sausage?
the UFC fighter.
The sausage?
Sausage.
Welcome to the Siri Yanks channel. I'm glad everybody's coming back. I know we are in that post-World Cup hangover per se. You know, it's back to reality. It's back to building toward the 2026 World Cup here in the U.S. It's back to being a fan of club football, all that great stuff. It's back to a sense of normality, I guess you could say, you know, especially in the wintertime. But, you know, for the USMNT, it's all about building toward the future, right? We had a decent showing. I think everybody would say that we could have had a better showing. But, you know, look, I think there's probably two question marks with the USMNT moving forward that you could say are the position most likely to have a battle in the future. I think number two is goalkeeper, but that's for another video, and I think that's closer than a lot of people may think. But our biggest question mark is obviously the number 9 position, right? And I think a lot of people could make a strong argument that 2 of the 3 guys that we brought to this World Cup probably shouldn't have been there, right? So I decided to make a list just for fun. Our 10 guys that I think could make a case for the starting 9 position in the 2026 World Cup. Now again, this is just for fun. I know people are going to absolutely think I'm crazy for leaving certain people off this list, or think I'm crazy for putting people on the list. But nonetheless, we'll go ahead and get into it. And remember, a lot can happen in 3.5 years to the next World Cup. I mean, 3.5 years ago, who thought Luca de la Torre's name would even be brought up making this World Cup roster, or who thought Jordan Pfolk his name would have ever even been mentioned with the USMNT, right? So just remember, a lot can happen, and this is just for fun. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Now at number 10, I know I'm cheating a little bit, but it's someone who's not on the radar. And like I said, a lot can happen in 3.5 years, right? Someone could come out of the blue, a youth player could come out of the blue, like I believe he's 14 years old, out of Borussia Dortmund. I don't remember his name, obviously, so that clearly means he's not on my top 10 list, but a guy like that could absolutely just end up destroying the Bundesliga and be obviously a shoe-in. Or someone from a past generation, right, could get hot and, you know, like, I don't know, let's just take CJ Sapong, for example. He could score 40 goals next year and end up going to a newly promoted La Liga or Ligue 1 team, right, and end up playing very well. You know, just a lot can happen. So at number 10, it's just going to be someone who we don't expect. Someone who's not on anyone's radar, right? That's my number 10. Now at my number 9 spot, look at this as my youth player pick that I think has the best outside shot of breaking into this team. Now my number 9 pick, clearly I don't think this is going to happen, but of all the youth players, I think this kid has got the best chance to develop into something that could potentially make some noise, if that makes sense. Now at number 9, I have Malik Sanogo. Now let me explain. He was born in New York and he's just 18 years of age, and I think he's showing a ton of potential. He signed in Union Berlin, and he's already had chances to train with the first team at times, even as recent as I believe last year. His father, last I looked, or last I could read, was actually a youth coach for the club. So he's clearly been, you know, developing his skills from a young age, and clearly he's got some genes there to work with. On the flip side, 2026 is probably a little bit too soon to be integrating him into the team unless he does develop fast. But on the flip side, if he does develop fast, he obviously has a chance, considering we're weak at this position. But if he does develop fast, unfortunately, he's also eligible to represent Germany, which is where he moved to before I believe he even turned 1 year old. So culturally speaking, he's probably closer to Germany. And he's also eligible to represent the Ivory Coast, which I believe is where his parents are from. If he does end up developing really good, he's probably up to him which crest he would rather represent or which gives him the better opportunity. But if that does come to that, I hope he obviously makes the correct choice that is more near and dear to his heart, even if it's not with us. But that is my number 9 choice. At number 8, I have Charlie Kelman. And I know, I'm a bit of a Charlie Kelman fanboy, and I'll admit, at 21 years old, his time is running out to develop that he actually can develop into a upper English league player, let alone a USMNT player. And he burst onto the scene at Southend United, where he scored, I believe, 61 goals one season for their youth squad, which is just insane. And then he got called up to their senior squad for the 19, I believe it was the 1920 Southend United squad that was just absolutely terrible, that got relegated. But I believe he was actually their leading scorer at just 5 goals for that squad as well. So obviously he showed a lot of potential working with pretty much a lot of nothing. And that urged Queen's Park Rangers, QPR, to buy him off Southend. And QPR is a fringe Premier League team. I mean, they've got a chance to go up to the Premier League this year, at least a playoff spot, fighting for a playoff spot at least. But look, he's had a couple of failed loans, and he finds himself back where he started at in League Two with Leyton Orient right now. And maybe he can regain his form, maybe he can't. I don't know, but I'm still holding off to a little bit of a hope that he can find his form that he had with Southend and end up fighting his way back into the conversation. And look, it's a long shot, I know, but 61 goals for a youth squad, being, I believe, the leading scorer for just an awful Southend United squad in League Two. I mean, you got to at least bring that up, right? Right? Probably not. I know, I get it, but still, nonetheless, he comes in at number 8 on my list. At number 7 on my list, I have a guy, well, it's the first guy on my list that actually has some USMNT minutes and some USMNT goals, and that is Sebastian Soto. Look, as a teenager, he had some Bundesliga minutes under his belt, and he ended up signing for Norwich City, which at the time I actually thought was sort of an odd move, and it ended up playing out kind of how I thought it was going to. It wasn't the best choice, or at least it didn't end up being the best choice. And like Charlie Kelman, he's had a few failed loan spells, but he also has some injuries to go with that. And he recently signed with an Austrian Bundesliga team, and I'm not really sure how he fits in with that squad specifically because they have a veteran striker already on the team. But I don't hate the move. I think the league itself probably fits where he's at from a talent standpoint. And I think it's probably made for his style, and I hope that this can resurrect his career, because a few years back we were looking at Soto as potentially someone who we could be looking at for long-term plans, but he's obviously fallen off the radar a little bit for most. But just like Kelman, he's got potential to regain his form, but he's also running out of time. So either way, there's an outside chance that he could, fight his way back into the conversation. So number 7, I've got Sebastian Soto. At number 6, I have one of my personal favorites on this list, which is Nicolas Gioacchini. He recently made a move to MLS, which I actually don't hate, even though I don't like the MLS, but I'll get into that in a minute. He's had 8 USMNT caps, and he, along with the next guy on my list, I think are actually the 2 most versatile forwards on my top 10 list. He showed promise during his time in League 2 over in France, but he completely fell flat during his run in Montpellier with Ligue 1. But now that he's in MLS, he's with an expansion team. Who knows what can happen. I think MLS is built for a player like him. It's an offensive league, or should I say lack of defensive league. But he can really shine in the MLS and potentially, make his way back to Europe. And that's exactly what I think MLS should be used for, is for a guy like him. But he also has the potential to just completely fade into oblivion if he doesn't do well for the expansion St. Louis club. Who knows what can happen, but I think he's the first guy on my list that actually has a real shot, other than an outside shot, to make some noise at a run for the 2026 club, or for the 2026 World Cup. Now, starting my top 5, I've got Matthew Hoppe. Now, a question for everyone who has watched Matthew Hoppe play, or is a fan of Matthew Hoppe, or even if you're not a fan of Matthew Hoppe. If it was not for those few games, just insane games at Schalke, which put him on everyone's radar, do you think we would be having a conversation at all at any point about Matthew Hoppe? No matter your feelings toward him, I would like to know your answer to that in the comments if you care to write it. Now, either way, whatever you think of that, Hoppe's got a lot of good tools to work with, more than I think a lot. He's quite tall for a striker, right? He's 6'3". He's quick. I think his best attribute is the fact that he is a high effort player, or he's always got a motor that's going, kind of like Brendan Aronson. That's what I think of when I think of a high motor player. I would argue that he was one of our best, if not our best, player at the Gold Cup a few years back. He was always on the move. He was always creating disturbances. Sort of like Timmy Weah was in the World Cup. He was just someone you always had to look out for. And then there was kind of the dark side. He signed with a La Liga club and he just completely bombed. Couldn't find his way onto the field. But now he finds himself at Middlesbrough with Zach Steffen, actually. And both these guys are sort of being gifted second chances in a transitional make-or-break league. That's what I would argue the English Championship is. It's a make-or-break league. It's good enough where if you're playing amazing, you're going to get chances. But it's also good enough where if you're not playing well, you may have just showed what your ceiling was. And it's in his hands what happens, but I think he's got the tools to succeed at Middlesbrough, and that's why he's up so high on my list. I still hold out hope that he's going to make his way back. And he's versatile, just like I said with Gioacchini. I think he's one of the most versatile forwards that we have. He can play on the wing, he can play central, he can play forward. He can play pretty much wherever on the pitch. And that's what I like about him. And you can argue whether that's a good thing to do or not, but if Greg Berhalter is... Trust me, I hope he's not. But if he is involved in the program moving forward, I do think that's something Greg takes into account, and he fits that profile. So he comes in at number 5 on my list. Now let's get into our top 4. And at 4, I have a very, very different striker from anyone else I've named on this list. I guess Bella likes this answer. But that's Daryl Dike, the big man. And, we all know if you take 3 strikers, obviously that means DK is the first one out, right? DK rose up the ranks pretty fast. I mean, he went from college to burning it up for Orlando City in seemingly overnight. He had a very successful loan at Barnsley, which almost took him to the Premier League, and I can't help but wonder if Barnsley were to have went to the Premier League, what would have happened instead of him going back for a second stint at Orlando City before he went to West Brom. But nonetheless, he's with historic West Brom right now, and injuries have kind of derailed him a little bit, but he's fighting his way back into the team at the time of recording this video. He's getting healthy and he's fighting his way back. And as I mentioned, he's a lot different than any of the other strikers I have on this list. He has a hold-up play. He's physical. If he can get his form back, I think 2026, he's going to be making an effort to be there. And unlike everyone else on this list thus far, he's proven that he can score when he moves up a league, right? So he proved he could score in the championship from the MLS, and I think that's something that's not talked about enough when Daryl Dike's name gets brought up. Look, he's got a very good chance of making it as long as he can stay healthy. And all these guys on the list, right? There's no reason why we shouldn't be hoping that they all just completely get their form back and burn it up, because they're all going to be the USA players. So let's all hope for the best. At number 3, which would be my first striker making the 2026 club, is Ricardo Pepi. And it doesn't matter what you think. I think most of us would agree that he should have probably been with us in 2022, this past year. You can argue about Josh and Jordan, but I don't think there's any way you can make an argument for Jesus or Haji should have been there over Ricardo. But I digress. This is not about that. When Pepi moved to Augsburg, I actually didn't like it, but I understood it from his standpoint and his party's standpoint, capitalizing on the Pepi train moving, getting that dough, right? But he looked out of place, and at 19 years old, he took a step back by going to the Netherlands on loan. He's showing signs of what he's capable of, and I fully expect Pepi to have a real shot at being our starting 9 in 2026. I think he's back on the correct trajectory to potentially work his way back up to the Bundesliga. And 19, he's got a bright future. Okay, whether or not he's going to be our starting 9, I don't know, but I think he's obviously deserving of a place on any team that we have as of this second. Unless we have a just flat out bona fide starter at our number 9 position, I'm all for switching it up based on matchups. I'm completely fine with that. And at number 2 is my first guy that right now I'm completely comfortable starting no matter what against any matchup, and that's Josh Sargent. I think as of right now, he's probably should be our starter, and I feel like he probably should have been our starter every game for the World Cup. The Jesus fiasco was just strange to me. But Bundesliga goals, check. Premier League goals, check. Possible English Football League Championship Golden Boot, potentially a check. He's got everything you want, and he grew up with most of the players that are starting with the team anyway. At this point, we all know who Josh Sargent is. A lot of fans will complain about the lack of goals, but look, does any striker really play that good under Greg's system? The past 4 or 5 years, and that's the answer to that's no. And Greg's system doesn't really put an emphasis on the striker scoring goals. And yes, I will agree. A lot of the shots he had or chances he had, he should have capitalized on. I'll give him that. But remember, he's still really young. He's got a very clear path at being the starter at the number 9 position moving into 2026. If not for this next guy, I think he's got the best path, other than my number 1, to be the starting 9. And unless something just insane happens, assuming Norwich gets promoted and just his form just falls flat on his face, I don't know. But either way, I think he's got the clearest path at being the number 9. Until we get to the next guy, which is a good transition. But before I do get into my number 1, here's a few guys that did not make my list. And I'm not reading off any script or anything when I talk about these 4 guys. These are just completely my thoughts, honest thoughts going forward. One of the guys that didn't make my list, I'll name 4 guys who didn't make my list, who are probably the biggest question marks on why weren't they there. So number 4 is Brandon Vasquez. He did not make my list because he's only had 1 good year, and it's an argument that he's not even the best striker on his team. He's got to show me a lot more moving forward, and he doesn't have age working against him, or he has age working against him, and I don't necessarily know if he's dead set on the USMNT anyway. So that's why he doesn't make my list. And number 3, Jesus Ferreira, he's not on my list because, look, I just don't think he's good enough. I don't think he's good enough against even mid-level CONCACAF teams. I don't think he should even be on the field. At number 2, I've got Haji Wright. And look, you can ask the guy I normally do these videos with, Adam, right? You can ask him. I love Haji Wright. I've always loved Haji Wright. I think he's a great player, but he is just not a USMNT type of player. And although I don't think he was as bad as Jesus, I think this World Cup proved that he's not good enough to be out there in these big games, right? And number 1, who some of you may think may even be my number 1 player, and that's Jordan Pefok. He did not make my list. And he did not make my list because I think Pefok's World Cup was the one that just ended, right? I think that was his prime years. Granted, his form died off a little bit, but I think that was his time to shine. And unfortunately, Greg didn't bring him. And at that time, I think, given his age, he's going to be, I believe, 30 in the next World Cup. So I think that time is gone. And by all means, maybe any of these 4 players will prove me wrong, and I'll be right there rooting for them. But they did not make my list. So let's get into my real number 1. My number 1 player, who I think has the best chance of being our number 9 in the 2026 World Cup, is Folarin Balogun. Now, he's an American-born player, English-raised striker who's got the potential to put us over the top, and I think could be our missing piece if he chooses to be on our squad. He averages a goal every other game in England's youth level and in Ligue 1 for his lone club Reims. He's an Arsenal player from youth. He's got strong ties to England, but due to his friendships with some USMNT players and due to some of the posts that he made rooting for us in the World Cup, it seems like we've got a good chance to snag him, similar to the way we did Yunus Musa. So I think he's leaning towards us, if I'm being honest. And if he does, I think it's going to... Now, is it all going to be roses if we get him? No, obviously not. But I think he is the piece that we're missing at our 9. And I think he can adapt to any situation and any system that we have with whatever coach we end up getting for the 2026 World Cup. That is my number 1 guy. And also the number 1 on my wish list for dual nationals. But either way, that is my number 1 guy. Tell me what you think of my list. What do you think of the guys I didn't put in the list? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. If this is the last video the channel puts out before the New Year's, please have a great New Year's and be safe out there, everybody. Bye.